Wow, haven't heard that before. So listen, guys, we're going to talk today and at our next meeting about weed control. Okay. I know perhaps some of this information you guys are very much familiar with, but I've got two presentations tomorrow and the next time we get together about the very basics of weed control, so that we make sure that we're all on the same page. Let me start this presentation if I can find it. How am I doing?
You're doing better than me.
Okay. So let's talk about weed control. Obviously, we've got a situation here where people have some serious weeds. The point that I need to make as far as weed control, and the thing that I think we need to always remember, is that weed control is perhaps the biggest single reason that our customers use us, or it's the single biggest reason customers hire a lawn care company. And numerous studies have been done throughout the years in regards to why customers leave lawn care companies. And it's been shown time and time again that a lack of adequate weed control is the single biggest reason customers cancel their lawn care service. So this isn't anything that we can gloss over. It's something that we try to give everybody a little bit better basic understanding of weeds, why they appear, how to control them, different types of weeds, different control strategies, so forth and so on. So we'll be talking about all of those things today and when we get together at the time of our next meeting. Need to start off talking about, and I can't emphasize this enough, that it is far easier and better for us and for our customers to prevent weeds from either getting into the lawn or reestablishing themselves in a lawn. By far, the biggest factor that is going to affect weeds in a lawn is mowing. Mowing high has been shown numerous times to have a dramatic impact on reducing the weed population in a lawn. And that's for a couple of different reasons. When you mow high, the grass is shading the soil surface, or conversely, if you mow low, you're reducing the density of the turf and sunlight is allowed to get down to the soil surface. The vast majority of weeds require direct sunlight in order to germinate. So if a lawn is being mowed too short, it's going to have far more weeds. If it's being mown too high, it's going to have or not too high, but if it's mown properly, being mown adequately high, there's going to be fewer weeds. Of course, when the lawn is mown high, the grass also is going to present more competition for the weeds, which is also going to help to reduce weed populations. Okay. The other major factor here, and of course, this is Seascape's job, is that by maintaining dense turf through adequate fertilization, we are preventing more weeds from germinating into the lawn. You've probably all seen, and in the slide we were just looking at a moment ago here, in this particular slide, it was lack of fertilization that required the dandelions on the left and the clover on the right in order to become established. Without adequate fertilization, the turf thins out. Again, sunlight gets down to the soil surface and weeds have the capability in order to become established. So mow high, maintain dense turf through adequate fertilization, and you're going to have far less of a problem with weeds in a lawn. There's various different ways in order to classify weeds that we're finding in a lawn. And by the way, I took the time, because there weren't too many slides here, I took the time to print out the slides and wanted you each to have a copy of this. So if you wanted to follow along and have something to take with you or something to write notes on, that would be, I thought you might find it beneficial. Okay. So we're going to talk about various types of weed classifications, including things such as annual versus perennial weeds, different types of weeds, grasses as opposed to broadleaf weeds. When we get into control strategy, we're going to talk about pre or post-emergent. Pre, of course, is controlling the weeds before they germinate. Post-emergent control is controlling the weeds after they germinate. We're also going to discuss that there are some very easy weeds to control, and there are some very hard weeds to control. Right in the middle of those two extremes, easy versus hard, is a group of weeds that are easy to control, but they die very slowly. Some weeds that we treat in lawns are easy to control, and they'll be dead in 24 hours. Other weeds in the lawn are easy to control, but it takes 2 to 3 weeks for the weed control to work. We'll talk a little bit about cool season versus warm season weeds and the impact that the season has on them. Summer versus winter weeds. And as I just mentioned, quick versus slow to die weeds is a thing that we need to deal with here. And that in particular is a customer education issue. So let's talk about these different types of classifications. Annual weeds versus perennial weeds. I think you guys all know at this stage of the game that annual weeds are weeds that grow for one season and they die, okay? The best example that we have there and the one that we're fighting most frequently is crabgrass. It germinates in the spring, grows through the summer, and dies in the fall. So it lives for one season. Contrast that to perennial weeds, and they grow from year to year. Best example there is dandelions. You'll see a dandelion germinate in the spring. It grows and develops throughout the summer. If we don't control it, it will continue to grow in the fall. It survives the winter, and then that same plant comes back as a reinvigorated, if you will, dandelion plant the next year. So that's the primary difference between annual and perennials. And as we're going to talk about, our control strategy for annuals and perennials are totally different. Okay, few more things as far as annual weeds, just to emphasize, okay? Annual weeds can generally be, or are most generally, what we refer to as summer annual weeds. They germinate in the spring, they die in the fall. I mentioned crabgrass. The other notable one is spurge. You've probably also noticed that now that we're into the middle or approaching the end of September, crabgrass is beginning to fade away. If you haven't seen it already, take a closer look at the leaves are turning purple, which is the result of cooler nights, but it's also the result of shorter days. As we get into the fall, crabgrass doesn't get, and most annuals do not get enough hours of daylight to survive. So crabgrass is going to die in the fall, not only due to lower temperatures, but it's also going to die in the fall due to shorter days. So annual weeds, okay, we just talked about crabgrass and spurge are what are considered summer annuals, germinate in the spring, die in the fall. We also, however, have another group of annuals that are called winter annuals. A winter annual is going to germinate in the fall and die in the spring. Fortunately, we don't have too many of those, but the most notable one is chickweed. We don't see a lot of it because it germinates generally after we do our last application, and it dies, or it's already dying at the time we go out to do our first application. If it remains cool in March and April, chickweed will hang on for a little bit longer. However, as soon as temperatures begin to rise, chickweed very rapidly dies away. We've all seen lawns with chickweed where we're on a lawn in late October doing the last application. It's weed free. And if you go back in January or February, it is just loaded with chickweed. But by April, the chickweed is all gone. So a winter annual is also an annual because it only lives for one season. But in this case, its growing season, if you will, is over the winter months. The next classification, okay, of weeds are grassy weeds or broadleaf weeds. Grassy weeds normally are referred to as, or can also be referred to as narrow leaf weeds as opposed to broadleaf weeds. Various types of narrow leaf weeds exist in lawns, and the example that I give here is nutsedge. Nutsedge, as compared to a dandelion, which has much broader leaves, nutsedge has got narrow leaves, and this narrow leaf versus broad leaf does play a role in control, because a narrow leaf weed, it's much more difficult to get an adequate amount of herbicide on it because the leaves are so narrow. That's one of the reasons nutsedge and other narrow leaf weeds are more difficult to control. Broadleaf weeds such as dandelions or clover are generally easier to control because there's more of the leaf that's exposed that will catch or capture the herbicide that we are applying. Back to narrow leaf weeds for just a moment. I give the example here of nutsedge, but other grassy type weeds such as crabgrass are also considered narrow leaf weeds, okay? Crabgrass is another example of a weed that when we try to control it post-emergently, after it's germinated, is difficult to control for many reasons, one of which is it has narrow leaves. So we talk about both narrow leaf as well as broadleaf weeds presenting themselves in a lawn. Control strategies. There's two basic control strategies that we use. The first is pre-emergent, which we at Seascape use here to control grassy weeds such as crabgrass. The picture here on the left is an example of crabgrass that probably germinated 5 to 7 days ago, and it's in the seedling stage. As I think you all know by now, we preferably control grassy weeds such as crabgrass with pre-emergent. If an annual grass such as crabgrass is established in the lawn, and we later on need to control it post-emergently or after it germinates, it is much more difficult to control. Other weeds, okay, as opposed to crabgrass, other broadleaf weeds, we control post-emergently. And there are broadleaf weeds that are annuals as well as perennials that we control post-emergently. Crabgrass, we control pre-emergently because we've got control products that work pre-emergently on crabgrass. Most broadleaf weeds, we control post-emergently because that is the most effective way to do it. Broadleaf weeds such as, I believe that's hawkweed, which is there, okay? There are really no effective ways to control most broadleaf weeds pre-emergently, and as a result, we need to control them post-emergently. Okay, that clear as mud? All right. So we also have, okay, another form of classification, easy to control weeds as opposed to hard to control weeds. By easy to control weeds, what I'm referring to is generally with one application of our herbicide, we achieve control, provided we make the adequate application. The reason they're easy to control, okay, in this particular case of chickweed, they generally tend to have soft, thin, or hairy leaves. They have soft and thin leaves, which means the herbicide that is applied will be absorbed very easily, or they have hairy leaves, meaning that when the herbicide is applied, those miniature hairs on the leaves will help to retain the herbicide and allow the herbicide to go systemically throughout the plant and control it. On the other extreme from easy to control are hard to control weeds, okay? They in general have thick, waxy cuticles. The example here is ground ivy. I'm guessing most of you have seen ground ivy in lawns. It is more difficult to control because of that thick, waxy cuticle. The herbicides that we apply number one, will roll off very easily. Okay, so they're physically in the soil where they're not going to do any good. But even when the herbicide is retained on the leaf, it's very difficult for the herbicide to get inside because of that thick, waxy cuticle. The cuticle is just the layer of wax on the leaf that the herbicide needs to penetrate in order for it to work. Easy to control weeds, provided we adequately and uniformly apply a weed control with generally controlled one application. Hard to control weeds generally are going to take 3 or 4 or more applications in order for them to get them under control. If you have a customer that has got a serious ground ivy problem, okay, depending upon the disposition of the customer and what the customer has asked for, you may want to, when you treat ground ivy, if there's a lot of it, you may want to write up a "we will be back" form to go back in a couple of weeks in order to treat it again, in order to get good control of it. Don't list it here, but the other one, which you've probably seen in addition to ground ivy, is violets in lawns. Violets, generally you're going to find them first and foremost in mulch beds, but they do have underground runners or underground rhizomes, and violets will creep out into the lawn from mulch beds. We very frequently have customers who like the violets in their mulch beds. They want to leave those alone, but they don't want them in their lawn. And one of our challenges, we can control the violets, but they got to keep coming back from the violets that are left in the mulch beds. Next, we have cool weather weeds and warm weather weeds. Okay, a cool weather weed is something such as a dandelion, which grows best in cool weather. Dandelions love April and May. Dandelions love September and October when the weather is cooler, when nights in particular are cooler, and it's not real hot during the day. Dandelions very quickly in the summertime will begin to wilt. You'll find them under heat stress. They do not like hot weather in the summertime. As a result, dandelion control in June and July, because the dandelions are under stress, dandelion control is much more difficult in July and August than it would be in April or May or September or October. Certain other weeds, and the most notable one here is crabgrass. Crabgrass and a bunch of other weeds such as purslane and spurge, okay, thrive under hot, dry conditions. Unlike dandelions, which in July and August tend to go dormant, just like the grass, tend to go dormant and wilt and show stress, crabgrass thrives under those conditions. Crabgrass and the other group of warm weather weeds operate with a completely different metabolic system than a dandelion. They grow the fastest, they spread the most rapid under hot, dry conditions. And you'll probably find, if you've got some of these weeds, if you treat them today and go back and do your next application in 5 or 6 weeks, you'll be astounded at how much some of these weeds can grow. The amount of growth that you're looking at there on that crabgrass plant, because it's so hot and dry in that stone mulch bed, that crabgrass plant is probably no more than 4 to 5 weeks old. Okay, so they grow very fast under hot, dry conditions. We also have summer weeds versus winter weeds. Okay, summer weeds thrive in the summer. We've talked at length about crabgrass. Spurge, which you see here, is a broadleaf weed. It's got very small, waxy leaves, just like crabgrass. Spurge grows very rapidly in the summertime and will die very quickly in the fall. Winter weeds, we've already talked about. The primary winter weed is chickweed. You're not going to see chickweed between May and October. You'll see chickweed between November and March generally. So there are summer weeds as well as winter weeds. Let's talk a little bit about quick to die versus slow to die when treated. Most broadleaf weeds are going to show signs of curling and signs of dying within 4 to 5 days. Certainly chickweed, when it's properly treated, dies reasonably quick. It's got to start to die before 4 to 5 days. You'll see it start to curl and start to wilt. The slow to die weeds, when we treat them, most notably are dandelions, clover, and nutsedge. Dandelions in particular, okay, respond to our weed control applications generally by flowering even more profusely, if you can believe it. But when we treat a lawn that's full of dandelions and it's flowering, the dandelion flowers actually for a short period of time become more abundant and more noticeable before the dandelion succumbs to the weed control application. Clover, okay, clover, we're generally not dealing with flowering clover, but clover in a lawn, when you treat it, you'll go back 2 weeks later and think, I didn't do anything here. It's not curling, it's not dying, it's not wilting, it's not doing anything. But you go back a week later and poof, it's all gone. Okay, so clover is an animal all into itself. Nutsedge also, okay, tends to die very slowly. Some of the newer products, and it seems like every year we have a new nutsedge control. Some of our newer nutsedge products actually work a little bit better and work a little bit faster than the old products, which didn't work as well. If in talking to a customer who has concerns about one of these slow to die weeds, if they're questioning you about what are you going to do about them, after you explain to them you're going to treat them, it wouldn't hurt for you to let them know these weeds do not die right away. Okay. Customers in many cases think we've got the ability to put weed control down, then the weeds are going to be gone by 7 o'clock the next morning. That is just not the way these weeds are going to die. It takes some time for the weed control material to be effective.
Just had that conversation with the customer today. They were like, "Wow, you guys were just here." I'm like, no, it takes some time. They were just here. Like, they were here 2 days ago. Like, they should be dead. Well, doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
Just had that conversation.
The other consideration is, and some of these names of Cool Power and T-Zone, but the type of broadleaf weed control that we use is also going to affect the speed at which weeds will show signs of dying. We use a product, our primary product that we use for weed control is Cool Power. I think you know that we use Cool Power primarily in the spring and fall. In the summertime, we switched to other products such as T-Zone. And years ago, we used to use a product called Trimec, which we don't use any longer. But depending upon the product that we use, Cool Power is relatively fast. When we switch to T-Zone in the summer, primarily so we don't burn lawns, T-Zone is quite a bit slower than Cool Power, but it's quite a bit faster than a product we used to use called Trimec. We don't use it any longer, so you don't need to concern yourself with that one. As I just said, Seascape uses Cool Power in the spring and fall for faster weed control, trying to demonstrate to customers that we are controlling weeds adequately. We don't use it in the summer due to chances of damage to lawns and adjacent plants. T-Zone, which we use in the summer, is a much slower but much safer product that we use, particularly under high temperature conditions, so that we don't create damage to lawns. Okay, that's all I have for today. Do you guys have any questions at all about any of this?
I think I'm also.
Just noticing that chickweed's, like, I'm barely seeing it now.
You'll be seeing a lot more of it here.
I meant spurge, sorry.
Spurge?
Yeah, it's starting to like really go away.
It should be starting to go away really quick. Yes.
Jim's point on the dandelion and what happens after you treat it, that's a pretty important point. Like, we get a lot of service calls, like one of you will go out and spray a dandelion, And 7 days later, it looks better. And then we'll get a lot of service calls. And by the time you guys get out there, it's now day 10 or whatever, and the dandelion's dead. If you get a lawn with a lot of dandelions in the spring, it's best to make a note through Mobile Live or on a fact sheet, whatever, to say, hey, look, this is gonna get worse before it gets better. Because that's gonna save a phone call to the office. That's gonna save you guys going back and doing a service call. But that's absolutely a thing. And we get 10, 20, 30 service calls, if not LSUs, if not service calls for you guys, where it's all it is. It was X at, day 1, it's now X times 2 at day 7, but at day 14, they're dead as a door.
Yeah.
But they look worse. And that's an issue where that's a spot where just explaining it to the customer will save a lot. That's a pretty important point.
Yeah, I would say like to customers, like just in layman's terms, because I obviously don't know like the chemistry behind it, but I was just like, in layman's terms, like it grows it to death. You know, you spray it, it's gonna flower, but it means it's
Yeah,
gonna
but
do
when
something.
we treat it with the herbicides that we use, it causes the metabolism of the plant
Mm.
to go even faster.
Oh, okay. So
It's
yeah, that
using
makes
up
sense.
food, it's using up carbohydrate reserves faster than it can produce new carbohydrates through photosynthesis.
All right. Well,
Yep.
that makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Cool.
super, guys.
Thank you.